Hi everybody, it's Luke McBain. Today again a video about an artist, or rather about what the artist is telling us about the artistic process. And I'm doing this series of videos on what artists tell us about their artistic process, because this process is identical to the process of leadership. And what is also very surprising is that when you look at the process which is told by a painter, there are similar characteristics to what is being told to us by a filmmaker. So I already did some videos on Tarkovsky, Beuys, Van Gogh, and today it's a German painter and sculptor, Anselm Kiefer. Again, this video is not so much about the work of Anselm Kiefer, but rather about what he says about the artistic process. And I found it very, very interesting and fascinating in what degree it does link to leadership. Now, I always say in the beginning, none of these artists ever claim to make any statements about leadership. In the case of Anselm Kiefer, it's a little bit different. It's very fascinating to see that somewhere in between, and I will point it out again, he does make a reference to other groups of people. And these are, for example, politicians and managers or leaders in the industrial world. And that's very interesting because he is pointing towards leadership in that moment. In the other clips I'm going to show, he does not reference leadership at all. Still, I believe that his statements are very important if we talk about the art of leadership. So let's have a look what he says. Again, in many cases, he is not making the connection himself. I am the one making the connection, but there's one example where he directly makes the connection to leadership. So let's jump right in. This is a symposium of some kind where he's being interviewed, and let's say what his statements were about the process of art making.
That in this theme was a lot explained what an artist is. An artist doesn't create ex nihilo. An artist, I feel it, is in a stream. He sits there, but things go through him, and so as this intellectual movement from Greece to India and from India to Greece, so that's what an artist is. He sits in the middle, and he's always durchdrungen.
Challenged.
He's pierced by thoughts, pierced
Yeah.
by thoughts and by movements, and so for this reason I brought you this little book.
So, the first thing I want to point out is that he says the artistic process is something which flows through the artist. And I would agree, you could say I would agree to that, and I would even say that you can say the same thing about leadership. It's a process which flows through the person. So this is quite different to this idea that leadership is a set of skills and traits and something which, you can learn a craft and then start to manipulate your environment in a certain way. This is more the idea that you're open to a certain kind of experience within leadership. And of course it's both. It's a craft and it's an experience at the same time. And he will also again repeat this notion of fluidity in quite a different way. And later on I'll point it out to you why I think also that is important. So, and I personally, when talking about leadership, I talk very often about the idea of fluidity, that leadership is the experience of a fluid process, of something connected to time and matter and information. And so that is something which you cannot control. You cannot control this flow of the sensation of the flow of time and events coming towards you, and then there are somehow in the past, and you have to make constantly decisions. So that is also the artistic experience.
Yes, but we have to distinguish about thoughts and about art. So art is not only thoughts. It's not only art is a combination of three things. It's feelings, it's intellect, and it's will. And if these three are together, then it becomes art and it becomes real. So I would not say what Descartes said, that ich denke, also bin ich. I would say the feelings are as important as the thinking, because a lot of decisions are not made only by rational things; they are made also about feelings, and you can see this in politics and in the industrial management, that a lot of decisions are made with feeling. The feelings are part of it.
So this was the part which I pointed out in the beginning, where he even said these are domains where the feeling is also part of it, and which is absolutely true. We know that to be true. It's astounding, however, how little that is being taught in terms of leadership, and how little people are actually prepared for that emotional component of leadership. So for the and also for the psychological component, and that's where people then start to suffer from that function, because they have not been prepared in any way for that kind of responsibility. And we see also this trend, especially in leadership literature, to furthermore try to put this under a rational domain and say it's all something which can be rationally explained and controlled at the same time, which is of course completely untrue, and does not explain anything what we can observe in terms of leadership, nor does it help actually to prepare anybody better for this kind of responsibility. So Anselm Kiefer said art is composed of three things, and also I think that's important to repeat what he just said. It's will, it's intellect, and it's feelings. So these three things have to be present for art to come into existence. And while we know that the will to lead is, of course, some sort of prerequisite for leadership, and we somehow are taught in business schools or in political science, yes, you have to have rational abilities and intellect, the feeling, the emotional side somehow is forgotten completely. Whereas when we then look at art, we seem to think that this is a purely intuitive, emotional process. So everything is being steered by these feelings, and these artists are somehow some sort of special kind of person which have deep feelings and they express these feelings. But again and again, when you look at what artists actually say about the artistic process, they would say that is absolutely not true. It's an important factor, but these three things have to play together. Same applies for leadership. Now, again, you have to work on both. You have to work on these, on the intellect, on the rational capabilities, but also on the emotional, intuitive capabilities and what they do for you. I usually, when talking about certain methods in leadership, I refrain from separating these two abilities. You can sort of, like, they're sort of interlinked, like intertwined, like this. So you can't actually separate them apart and put them back together. You have to develop something within leadership where both these aspects are represented at the same time and make perfect sense. For example, when working with paradoxical thinking, that is the case, or with metaphors, you could say metaphors is the expression of that interlinkage between rational and irrational, or rational and emotional or intuitive expression. So there are these methods which can be used in leadership to actually link these two aspects together immediately. Because if you talk about feelings, then people will go, well, now I have to feel more, or I have to like feel deeper or something like that. And that, of course, is nonsense. Nobody has to feel anything. It's just developing the sensation of that interlinkage between feelings and rational thought, which then come together to produce meaning. Because as you already know, or I just now guess that you know, only when you look at the world in a rational sense, it doesn't make sense at all. There is no such thing as a rational construction of reality, because if there were, you could just do it, go ahead, press a button, and be super successful. That's not how it works. And so you have to bring those two together to, especially the what you actually intuit about the world with your rational thinking capabilities to have a sense-making process.
You know, I do always before I start a painting or a sculpture, I do a concept. I have an idea what I want to do, but then the concept get lost. Most of the times, it doesn't work, and then I get another concept. So you need a concept to start with, but then I lose it, and I have it always goes to another in another way as I thought should be. And I work for this. I want to be surprised, you know. Otherwise, I wouldn't do all this pain to work so much, you know.
Yeah. So why I looked into this clip or found it interesting for leadership is this thing where he said in the beginning, well, you start with an idea or with a concept, and then it becomes something else. And I thought that was also a good hint in terms of management by objectives, or setting yourself goals, or setting the team goals and all that. I think that's somehow a good start if at the beginning you really don't know where you're going and you have to have some sort of rough idea and communicate that. So yeah, you set an objective and say, well, we want to achieve that. But also, this is from my own working experience, but also experience of many others, then it becomes something else in that process of trying to achieve that. We'll go into that again a bit later, and it's fascinating to see how that also concurs with other art forms, especially narrative. There was a short sentence at the end where he says, I want to be surprised. And I think that's extremely important. So this sense of exploration, the sense of wanting to be surprised, the sense of openness towards that unknown future, to lift other potential out of that future. So you have to be willing to have that experience of surprise. If you don't want to be surprised, it's very unlikely that something surprising will happen. Well, at least not in a sense which will surprise you in a positive way. I'm sure something surprising will happen, but you will more see it as an irritation, as something very annoying, which you don't want to have in your pathway towards that objective. But again, that's just, that could be something, that could be a risk, of course, threatening the achievement of what you set out to achieve. But on the other hand, it could be something very promising. And you see that a lot, by the way, when team members do voice different ideas along the pathway of what else could be done, or and in many cases then this is shut down because it doesn't fit into that objective, and because that person who is managing or leading that process or that team does not want to be surprised, not in any sense. So it doesn't matter if the surprise is a benefit or it's a risk. It's annoying and irritating in the first place. So leadership always has that element of, or that willingness, that openness of letting oneself be surprised in the process, and also accepting that the concept, the idea, the objective set rationally in the beginning or the first steps most probably are not where you're going to end up. So if you have that open mind, you will end up in a more promising place, in a place of higher potential.
It's always different, the beginning from the end. It's always be given different from what you want to do and what you get then. I think in life too, you know. When you have an idea, what you dream, what you want to get, and when you get it, it's not what you dreamt, no? It's very often like this.
So he says, yeah, it's like in life. What you want is not what you get. So that's an old saying. And probably everybody out there has made that experience. You want something specifically, but while you try to achieve it, something else happens and you get something entirely different. And once you get it, it doesn't seem quite as satisfying as you had imagined it. But something else emerged, which was very interesting and surprising and very fulfilling to experience. Now, this is almost like a universal law. I was just astonished that Anselm Kiefer brought it so up to the forefront as an experience during art making, during painting and sculpting, that what you want is not what you get. What you get is something different from what you want, because it's Aristotelian poetics all over again. It's really the foundation of narrative, of dramatic arts. You have always in dramatic arts this aspect of wants and needs. So in a hero's journey, you always have somebody who wants something, and is not quite aware of what he or she needs, and discovers that along this journey, this process. And so in any case, and if you translate that back into leadership, it is important to retain that openness, so that on one hand, that will to achieve something, to construct something, to shape something out of reality, but on the other hand, to be quite aware and open of that emergent thing which is happening in that process, that need which arises out of that in that process. Because if you ignore it in some way, it will make itself heard in any case. So it doesn't matter what that is. This need will come to the forefront and bite you in the back, basically. Or if you're like an artist, or if you're into leadership, then you can really lift the potential of that experience and turn it into something positive.
You go from one painting to the other and look for the difference, and so and you are more between the paintings than in the painting, and that's what is important for me. I'm always between two paintings. I do this, and then I think already on the next one, and I'm not really in one thing. I'm always in the transition, and when I saw these Monet paintings, it makes it easy to think like this, because they're all the same, but they are different daytimes, so different colors. And then I like the idea to imagine you don't look at the painting, you look always between the paintings. And this idea I like very much, and I'm always between.
Well, I was going to ask exactly that, because with the Monets, you almost have to imagine the transition from one to the other. But it seems in your painting, you're trying to capture the actual transition. You're not wanting the stability of something that is what it is. You're wanting something that is gesturing between two things, yes, within the one work. Is that right?
Stability is a big illusion. Another illusion than the general illusion, but it's also an illusion. Stability, or already the Greeks, Heraclit, he said, alles fließt, pantarei. He was already aware of the non-stability of the things.
Yeah.
So there's an important point here which doesn't quite come across. There's another interview where it's more to the point where he says quite clearly what he means here. First of all, you have to understand the painting you've just seen was by Monet, it wasn't by Anselm Kiefer, and he refers to that he sees several of these haystack paintings and he sees himself somehow between those two paintings. But that's not the point. What really I found important is that he himself sees him in this fluid process all the time. And this resolves a lot of things in terms of leadership, of course, because before I saw this particular interview, I was doubting a little bit this idea of leadership as an artistic process, because in art you have the art product, you have the movie, you have the novel, you have the painting, you have the sculpture, and so in my understanding, then you were working towards this one product and then towards the next, right? And but in leadership, of course, especially if you work in organizations, you work there every day, and sometimes over years in a leadership function on a day-to-day basis. Of course, you have your projects, and you have your performance indicators and targets and whatnot, and you have things to achieve. But it's always this sort of like ongoing process which you are in, and it's exactly that which Anselm Kiefer refers to in that answer when he says it flows all the time. So there is no end to the artistic process just because a work of art has been finished. It basically just continues. Maybe there's a certain apex, you could experience that, but basically it's always this fluid motion all the time throughout the entire life. It doesn't stop once a work of art has been finished, it just goes on.
I painted figurative things you could see. And I was, they thought I'm reactionary, because I'm not abstract, I'm not minimalist. And I must say, that's part of the idea that it has an eschatology, that it goes up like this. But, look at I like very much minimal art, that we don't misunderstand us. It was an important moment in the art after the École de Paris to have something clear. But what you do after the minimal art, what you do when you have done all these stripes, and then what you do then? so life goes on, and history goes on. And I think in the art there is not this line up that the art got always better or more precise or more radical. I think in the art history there is not the evolution.
So at first I thought, what has that got to do with leadership? If he says in the art there is no evolution, and somehow we do know there's some sort of art history, and art developed from something figurative and something more abstract. But Anselm Kiefer says that doesn't really exist. Like, we don't become more and more and more and more and more abstract. That's just not the case. There are then artists who go back to figurative painting or landscape painting, or start to mix certain aspects of art. So this idea that there's a certain constant evolution up towards something and then it goes up and up and up doesn't really exist. And I agree. Now, in terms of leadership, this is also quite interesting, because there is this trend, at least this is what you can observe in your own surroundings when you look at the discussion about leadership, that there is this, I would say, fake leadership discourse, which is trying to promise the leadership style or leadership theory or leadership concept, which now reflects where we stand as a society, which sort of like gives the answer to current problems. I don't know, now it's collaborative leadership, agile leadership, digital leadership. So basically you can just take anything and put it in front of leadership and reflect through that yeah, the idea of leadership is in constant development, and now it's the most modern form. It's all utter nonsense, of course. That's not the case. It doesn't develop like that, and it certainly does not. I mean, one could argue, yes, maybe there is now more participation, or people expect something different, but once you're in the workplace, once you are an organization or a business and you look at how people behave, you don't really see a lot of that there's this huge cultural shift, or everybody is using a same cultural pattern in their particular leadership. So you don't see any of that. So it's like Anselm Kiefer says, there is no real evolution. The sense-making process, because if you look at leadership as the art of creating meaning, which it is essentially, that's what leadership is, then this art has been around for thousands of years. So this ability to make sense of a complex environment, to communicate that, is something which has always been there, and in one or the other form. And to say that there's this evolution and now we are at the highest peak of leadership development is simply not true.
The straw, the earth and things like this. Where do these conceptions come from? Is it with lead, is it your sort of personal reaction to the mutability of the material, or is it something deeper?
I use a material when I'm shocked by it or fascinated. For example, I discovered lead by accident. I had a very old house in Germany, and the sewerage was out of lead, and it was kaput. It has to be repaired, and I was so fascinated by this material, lead, that from then on I continued to do a lot with lead, and but this is because I was fascinated, because there was something in the material. I think the materials have already some spirit in. It's not like Plato, who said there are the ideas, and then the ideas produce the objects.
Concrete objects.
Yeah, I think the spirit is already in the material if you can discover it. I don't discover all the materials. I have the lead, the straw, and things like that. So, and it's inside, and the artist brings it out.
So, for those who now wonder a bit, where is he going with that, especially with the spirit which is in the material and all that, just bear with me with a moment and say, okay, except that for him it's the spiritual emotional process of discovering something in the material. Let's stay with that, with the discovery of what is in the material, because it has a lot to do with leadership, and I'll explain why in a moment. What he says in the beginning, it's hard to understand, but it's also very important. He sort of he's confronted with a new material and experiences something like a shock, like a surprise when he just sees the material. In this case, lead. So he's somehow shocked, and then he becomes fascinated by the material and senses the potential of it and what is within that material. Why I found that interesting is that in leadership, you have that similar sensation at times. You are confronted with the world, or with the material world, or with certain impulses, and you can call that the world in its complexity, which you're confronted with. You can call that your material. So, as a painter, maybe working with colors and the scaffold and the brushes, or the sculptor with the material, you can say within leadership the whole world is the material. And at times you also have that sensation of shock and surprise and numinosity. And numinosity is that sensation of there's something happening, I don't know what it is, it's completely unknown to me, it makes me feel a little afraid, but also the sensation of being fascinated by it. So again, this duality of fear and fascination rolled into one. And this is what he describes in that moment, this numinosity of the material. And if you experience that in your leadership capabilities or leadership capacity and in your function, that's a very good sign that you're onto something, and that you're on this pathway of discovery, of lifting whatever that is, where you still don't know what is this, but this is sort of interesting but new and also makes me afraid. So you have this also extra care with that phenomena which you see in front of you, which you would like to understand better, and there could be some huge potential in it, but because it's strange, you have to also give it a certain care, because you don't really know, is this now a threat, or is this, is a huge potential for you and for whoever you're working for. This is then what he refers also to the spirit, or this is what is in the material. So roughly speaking, you could translate that back to leadership. If the whole world is your material, your working environment is your material, what is it which you wish then in that moment to shape out of it, to lift out of that material as a future potential? What is that fascinating thing? And even more, to come back from the abstraction level, from this theoretical level, it is just something to start training yourself in, self-observe. When is that happening? And how does it make itself known to you once you encounter that and say, oh, now it's happening again. So this is actually a good thing. I have to explore that further, because that just means I probably will be even more successful than I'm already now at this moment in time.
There's an artist I like very much, it's Rodin. And he said, il faut toujours travailler. Can you translate it?
Don't you work for everything?
You have to work, always to work.
Yeah.
Il faut toujours travailler.
So you always have to work, and comes from an artist, and also Rodin said this, and he obviously Anselm Kiefer always believes in that. And you hear that again and again, this aspect of work, of effort, of having to do something, of going into action. So this appears to be central to all art. There is no art without any action, of constant work. Doesn't exist. So this notion that artists are these people who are sort of like, oh, they wait for an inspiration, sort of like comes to them and they feel these things and start to express them, does not reflect at all the artistic reality and the artistic experience. We would never say of anybody, well, maybe you would say of some people in management and leadership, that they don't work a lot, or perhaps they're just doing the wrong thing, or they work the wrong thing, who knows. But in general, we would say, yes, they do work, or they do some sort of work, or without work, they couldn't achieve anything. So there seems to be some sort of basic understanding of work there. Again, to be contested in some cases, but in general, you would still accept that they work. And my point being here again, this notion of action. And again, this notion that action is better than non-action, because only through action discovery is possible and shaping the future is possible. And as it is in art, so it is in leadership. I hope you enjoyed that section on Anselm Kiefer in this interview. I said in the beginning it was a symposium. I don't really know what sort of event it was. I think it was a specific event only to be for him. I will put a link in the description below. I'll put a second link also specific on the work of Anselm Kiefer in the description below if you would like to learn more about him, or would like to see the interview in the whole length to see also the context of that interview, then please click on these links. I also recommend looking at some other videos where I talk more theoretically about art, values, and leadership, and the narrative process, and how that is interlinked together to create the future, and why this transformation process is central to the function of leadership, not the notion that it's about manipulating others to do something which you want them to do. That is a function downstream from this function. So that you have to basically focus on the higher principles and communicate them then to your team, the people you're working with. Why are we doing what we're doing? Why is it important? What is the meaning of that journey we are on right now? Thanks a lot for listening. It was a real pleasure. I'll see you in the next video.